We just left off with getting our current date to show up on the page. So we wrote this code up here above that created a new date and called it a constant current date. And from there we found the month number and then used an array to give that number a name that we could display that was user-friendly. And we also got the date and the year, and then we created a string that we then put into an element that had the ID current date. Now we're going to do something very similar, and we're going to do that for the current time. And so if we go back to our index page, you can see that we have our two HTML elements, one that has current date, and that's the one we're replacing right now with our code that we wrote in the last video. And then we've also got one with the ID of current time. So we're going to do this exact same thing as before. We've got our document, also referred to as the DOM, or the Document Object Model, which is what our HTML is. It's the document in the browser. In that document, we're getting an element by ID, current time, and we're taking that element and we're changing its text content to whatever we want. And in this case, let's start with Hello World. Save that and reload the page. Okay, so we've correctly got that set up where it is now displaying a string that we give it in the correct place. So you can see here that I've written some comments into my code. In JavaScript, if you do this 2 forward slashes, that comments out the code, which means that the JavaScript, as it's running from the top to the bottom of the document, it won't run anything that's commented out. So you can use that to either comment out code that you don't want to run while you're debugging something, or even use it as comments for what the code is supposed to do. Or in this case, I'm using it sort of as almost an acceptance criteria, or all of the different things that we want to have done by the time we are done with this section. So let's start with pulling the hours out of the current date. So if you remember, at the very top here, we set a variable current date, and that's our new date. And so every time we load this page, this new date is created, and we set it to this constant here. So once it's set, this is a static value. This doesn't change. So we're going to take our current date, and we're going to take, the date has different functions. As you remember, we've got get month, get date, get full year. We've got another one called get hours. Okay, and we want to set this to a value that we can reuse. So we're going to create a constant called hours, and we're going to set it to that. And now that we've got a constant that we can use, let's go ahead and replace Hello World with hours, just so we can see what it looks like. All right, so it's 13, which, if you know, is in a 24-hour clock, that's 1 o'clock. All right, the next step in our process is to figure out if it's AM or PM. So we've got our 13, so how do we know if this is an AM or PM? Is it in the morning? Is it in the evening? And so we're actually going to make a new constant. We're going to call this one meridian, which, if you remember, AM stands for anti-meridian and PM stands for post-meridian. So we're going to just call it meridian. And what we're going to do is we're going to do an expression, and we're actually going to use something called a ternary operator. And I also like to call it the Elvis operator. Because when you take out all of the rest of the expression, this is what it looks like. It looks kind of like Elvis's swooshy hair and his eyes. So there's your Elvis operator. And the way that works is you have an expression, and if that expression is true, then it's going to return whatever's right here. If it's false, it's going to return this instead. Okay, so what we're going to do is our expression, we're trying to find out, is this the afternoon? And the way to know if it's the afternoon is if the value is higher than 12, or really 12 p.m. noon is p.m. So if it's greater than or equal to 12. So if hours is greater than or equal to 12, then we know we are p.m. So we're going to create a string p.m. And if it's not greater than or equal to 12, it must be the morning, so it's AM. Okay, so now we have an AM or a PM, and we're going to go ahead and add this to our string. Okay, if we reload our page, now it's 13 p.m. Okay, we've got our p.m. in there, that's good, but 13 is still not very user-friendly because if we have the p.m., we should be using a 12-hour clock. So let's go ahead and figure that out. So we want to take hours, and actually, when I left off, this was still const. So we're going to go ahead and use that a minute. When we have hours, we're going to say, we're going to use something called the modulus operator, or the remainder operator. And what that does, it's very much like long division. You know, when you do long division, instead of having a number with a decimal, with long division you have a remainder. That's what the modulus operator does. It returns the remainder when you do that division. So go ahead and Google that and learn more about that. But what we want to do is we want to take the hours that we currently have and we want to divide it by 12 and get the remainder. And what that's going to do is if it's something less than 12, then the remainder is going to be that same original number. If it's greater than 12, then like 13 for example, the remainder will be whatever it is greater than 12. So in this case, 13 divided by 12 has a remainder of 1. So now we're resetting our hours to that remainder. Now if you remember, I just a moment ago switched this back to const because I wanted to show you what the difference of a constant is versus a variable. So constant means that this is a static value and can't change. So if I reload this page, I'm now getting an error, and that error is that I'm trying to assign something to a constant variable. So what I've done is I've taken this hours variable, this constant, and I'm trying to give it a new value. And because it's a constant, it cannot change, which is really nice if you want to make sure that certain things don't get modified. But since we do want to modify hours, we're going to use let instead. Now if I reload this, I no longer have an error, and I'm able to see that I now have this modulus with a remainder of 1. So I can now see it's 1 p.m. instead of 12. Okay. Now what if it is actually 12 o'clock? Let's see what happens when we do that. Okay, our remainder of 12 divided by 12 is actually 0. And that's not really going to work very well for a user. They're going to be like, what is 0 o'clock? So let's go ahead and change that. We're going to use our Elvis operator again. So if hours is 0, which is actually a falsy value, so there's a couple different ways you can represent Boolean, and one of the ways in JavaScript is the value 0 is falsy. So it's going to return a false. So if hours is not 0, then it's going to just return itself the way it was. It's going to stay the same. If it is 0, we're going to change it back to 12. Okay, there we go. Now we're at 12 p.m. Okay, now our next step is if the hour is a single digit, we want to add a 0 in front of it. So let's just add a temporary thing where we set hours to 1, just so we can see what a single digit looks like. All right, so if we have a single digit, we want it to look like 0, 1. So this is going to get a little bit complicated here. We're going to use the ternary operator again, and we're also going to create a Boolean to do some checking. So we're reassigning hours, so hours equals, and what we want to check is if hours is a single digit number. So hours is less than 10. Remember, this is not less than or equal to, it's less than. So if it's less than 10, in this case it's going to be 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Any of those numbers is going to be less than 10. So if it's less than 10, it will return true, otherwise it will return false. So with our ternary operator, our Elvis operator, if it's true, which means it is a single digit, then we want to add 0 plus our hours. Okay, if it's false, we just want to leave hours as it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that. Now it's 01 p.m. And in this case, let's delete that 1, reload it. 12. So if it's a 2-digit number, it stays the same. If it's a 1-digit number, it has that 0 in the front. Perfect. All right, pop quiz. True or false? The variables for hours is a number. All right. Go ahead and make your guess. What do you think it is? I'm going to go ahead and save that. And this is just a little console log that is going to do type of, gives us the type of a variable that we pass in. So this is going to output a string in our console once I reload my page. So true or false, the variable for hours is a number. Make your guess. I'm going to reload. The variable hours has the type number. Okay? Now, what if I changed my hours to be 1, and then we have this little addition going on here? Then what's that going to be? Let's reload. Very interesting. So now that type changed to string. And what JavaScript does is if it's got a string and a number and you're trying to concatenate those together, it's going to convert it to a string. So nothing that we care too much about right now, but something that's good to be aware of. So let's go ahead and delete that pop quiz. We don't need that in there. All right, we're back to 12 p.m. Perfect. Now we need to get our minutes. So we're going to do something very similar to what we just did for the hours. And we're going to do let minutes equal current date dot get. I'm going to guess minutes is probably what we want. Save. And then let's actually, at the bottom of my screen here, let's add minutes plus our meridian. See what that looks like. Well, that's kind of weird. And that's doing some weirdness here because what we're doing is we're adding numbers together first. And we need to actually make this into a time format with our colon here. See what that does. There we go. We've got 12:59 right now. Now, we've got the same thing going on with what if our minutes is a single-digit number. So, for example, let's say minutes equals 9. That looks funny. We need to format that differently. So let's do the exact same thing that we did above. And you can even copy and paste this here. All right, and we're going to use, instead of hours, we're using minutes. So again, what we're doing is taking minutes and reassigning it to a value based on if minutes is less than 10, that is, if minutes is a single-digit number, then add a 0 in front of minutes. Otherwise, just use minutes. Okay, so if we save that, perfect. Our single-digit number now has a 0 in front of it. If we remove that and go back to this, we've now got 0, 0 because it's now actually 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. All right, so the time changed on us, and I see now it says 12:01, but remember just a moment ago we were at 12:59, and the reason for that is because we accidentally changed something and forgot to change it back. So let's change that back to hours. There we go. That's our current time again. So we're back to the current time, and we now have minutes that has a 0 in front of it. Okay? If we wanted to do the seconds, we would do the exact same thing, only instead of get minutes, we would be doing get seconds. So I'm going to leave that one for you to go ahead and try on your own, but that's very straightforward. And then to build the string, we've already got our string put together, and to add the seconds, you would just do the exact same thing you did with minutes, and you should be able to pull that off on your own. Now notice that our clock is not staying up to date. So actually let's go ahead and do that so we can see this really clearly. So hopefully you took a moment to do this yourself, but if not, we're doing the exact same thing, only we're changing minutes to seconds, and then we're going to add another colon plus seconds, and then let's add a space plus meridian. Okay, let's go ahead and reload. Now you'll notice these seconds are not currently counting. This is a static string, And that's all we've done right now so far is on the page load, we create our current date. And from that current date that's created on the page load, we are finding the current time when the page loaded. So in the next video, we'll talk about how to actually make this be updating on a regular basis so that you can see the time counting as you're on the page.